When you emotionally detach, something profound happens beneath the surface, something most people misunderstand. Detachment is not coldness, and it is not weakness. It is the quiet decision to stop offering your nervous system as a playground for someone else's unmet needs. For a narcissistic woman, this shift is deeply destabilizing. Her sense of control has never depended on logic or truth. It has depended on your reactions, your explanations, your defended on your defenses, your emotional fluctuations. These were the levers she pulled to reassure herself that she mattered, that she had power, that she existed in your inner world. When those reactions disappear, the silence becomes louder than any argument ever was. You are no longer feeding the dynamic, and the psyche notices absence far more intensely than presence. This is where obsession begins, not because she suddenly loves you more, but because the structure that supported her identity has cracked. As Carl Jung observed, what we do not consciously confront returns to us as fate. Your emotional withdrawal forces her to confront what she has been avoiding. Her dependence on external validation. Your calm unsettles her because it cannot be manipulated. Your neutrality feels like rejection, even if you say nothing. In her inner world, detachment is interpreted as superiority, not arrogance, but psychological independence. You are no longer seeking approval, and that quietly inverts the power dynamic. The narcissistic mind struggles deeply with this because it equates attention with existence. When you stop reacting, it feels to her as if she is disappearing. This is why she may escalate. Provocations become sharper, charm becomes exaggerated, or silence becomes strategic. All of it is an attempt to pull you back into emotional orbit. But the more grounded you remain, the more the contrast intensifies. You are not attacking her. You are simply no longer available for psychological consumption. And this is the essential insight. Your strength is not proven by dominance, arguments, or victory. It is proven by self-regulation. When you master your reactions, you reclaim your inner authority. You stop being a character in someone else's drama and become the author of your own life. The moment you realize that your peace is more valuable than being understood is the moment the game ends, whether the other person knows it or not. When self-respect becomes non-negotiable, manipulation quietly loses its grip. This is one of the most destabilizing experiences for a narcissistic woman, because manipulation has never been about intelligence or strategy alone. It has been about access. Access to your guilt, your empathy, your fear of being misunderstood, your desire to be seen as good. The moment you stop bargaining with your own values to maintain harmony, the entire psychological economy changes. Self-respect is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in what you no longer tolerate and what you no longer explain. You stop justifying your boundaries. You stop rescuing your boundaries. You stop rescuing others from the consequences of their behavior. And most importantly, you stop confusing compassion with self-betrayal. For the narcissistic psyche, this is alarming. Her usual tools, shame, charm, withdrawal, triangulation, begin to fail because they require your cooperation. Manipulation only works when someone is willing to doubt themselves. Here, a deeper psychological truth emerges. As Carl Jung understood, the ego defends itself by projecting power outward when inner stability is lacking. A narcissistic woman relies on bending others because she cannot regulate herself internally. When you stand firmly in your self-respect, you refuse to carry emotions that were never yours to begin with. This forces her to face her own internal chaos, something she has long avoided. Your boundaries feel like an insult to her not because they are cruel, but because they expose reality. Reality says she cannot control you. Reality says she cannot control you. Reality says your worth is not negotiable. Reality says love does not require self-abandonment. And this confrontation is experienced not as information, but as a threat to identity. That is why resistance often intensifies right here. She may accuse you of being selfish, cold, or changed. In truth, what has changed is that you are no longer accessible to manipulation. There is something profoundly grounding about this stage. You begin to trust yourself again. You no longer look outward for permission to say no. You don't need to punish, argue, or convince. Your consistency does the work for you. And paradoxically, this is what creates obsession, not your presence, but your psychological unavailability. Remember this. Manipulation collapses the moment you decide that your inner stability matters more than someone else's approval. When you honor yourself without apology, you don't just protect your boundaries, you teach others how limited their power over you truly is. When your independence becomes visible, it does something far more unsettling than confrontation ever could. Independence, in the psychological sense, is not about distance or withdrawal. It is about inner sufficiency. It is the moment she realizes that your sense of self no longer orbits around her moods, approval, or attention. For a narcissistic woman, this is not simply disappointing, it is existentially threatening. Her identity has been reinforced through being needed, admired, or emotionally central. When that role disappears, so does the structure that once made her feel secure. You see, dependence is predictable. It can be managed, shaped, and controlled. Independence cannot. When you make decisions without consulting her emotional temperature, when your joy, focus, and direction are no longer influenced by her reactions, something collapses inside her psyche. She begins to sense that she is no longer essential to your inner life. And for the narcissistic mind, not being essential feels dangerously close to being invisible. This is where fixation begins. She may suddenly become hyper-aware of your routines, your progress, your confidence, not because she wants to celebrate your growth, but because it exposes a painful contrast. You are building a life that does not require her participation. That reality creates a quiet panic. As Carl Jung noted, when the ego cannot integrate weakness, it compensates by seeking control. Your independence denies her that compensation, but makes this especially destabilizing, is that your autonomy is not aggressive. You are not proving anything. You are simply living, and that is what makes it intolerable. There is nothing to argue against, nothing to dismantle. Your independence becomes a mirror, reflecting her reliance on external validation and emotional leverage instead of inspiring self-reflection. It often provokes envy, criticism, or subtle attempts to reinsert herself into your decision-making process. But here is the deeper transformation happening within you. Independence restores your internal compass. You stop asking, how will this be received? And start asking, is this aligned with who I am becoming? That shift is profound. It signals that your life is no longer a negotiate. Ion. It is an expression. And this is the quiet truth worth remembering. The moment you stop needing someone to feel whole is the moment their power over you dissolves. Independence is not abandonment, it is liberation. When you choose to stand on your own psychological ground, you don't just unsettle others. You finally come home to yourself. As you grow, something subtle but deeply unsettling occurs in the psychological space between you and a narcissistic woman. Growth is not just improvement. It is differentiation. It is the process of becoming more yourself, more grounded, more internally aligned. And this is precisely what exposes her inner emptiness, not because you point it out, not because you judge her, but because your development creates contrast. Where there was once symmetry, there is now divergence. A narcissistic structure survives by avoiding the inner void. It stays busy with attention, admiration, conflict, or control. When you begin to mature emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, you remove yourself from that cycle. You no longer offer chaos as stimulation. You no longer validate dysfunction by participating in it. And in that absence, she is left alone with what she has been running from. This is not experienced as insight. It is experienced as discomfort, even shame. Your growth becomes a mirror she did not consent to look into. She sees your stability and is reminded of her fragmentation. She observes your clarity and feels her confusion more sharply. As Carl Jung understood, when aspects of the self remain undeveloped, they form a shadow. Your progress illuminates that shadow, not intentionally, but inevitably. And illumination without readiness often produces resentment rather than reflection. This is why her behavior may subtly change. She may diminish your achievements, reinterpret your growth as arrogance, or suggest that you have changed for the worse. These are not objective assessments. They are defensive maneuvers. Your evolution threatens the narrative she has relied on to avoid her own inner work. It suggests that change is possible, and that possibility is terrifying. When one has built an identity around stagnation masked as superiority, what is crucial to understand is that this dynamic has nothing to do with cruelty on your part. Growth is not an attack. It is an invitation, one she may not be willing to accept. And so, instead of stepping forward, she fixates. Obsession emerges not from desire, but from the unresolved tension between who she is and who she refuses to become. Meanwhile, something important is happening within you. As you grow, you stop seeking validation from people who cannot meet you at your level of consciousness. You become less reactive, less entangled, more discerning. You begin to choose depth over drama, alignment over attachment, and that choice changes everything. Here is the reflection to carry with you. When your growth makes others uncomfortable, do not shrink to preserve their comfort. Expansion is not betrayal. It is responsibility, and the courage to continue growing, especially when it disrupts old dynamics, is one of the clearest signs that you are finally living from your true center. When you become unavailable, not physically, but psychologically, you undergo a quiet transformation in the other person's mind. Unavailability does not mean cruelty, avoidance, or emotional shutdown. It means access has changed. You are no longer easily reached through guilt, nostalgia, or provocation. And for a narcissistic woman, this shift is deeply destabilizing because her sense of influence has always relied on emotional immediacy. When that immediacy disappears, the mind fills the silence on its own. What follows is not longing in the healthy sense. It is rumination. She begins replaying conversations, reinterpreting moments, questioning where control was lost. The absence of response creates a vacuum, and the narcissistic psyche is especially vulnerable to this. It struggles with unresolved endings because closure would require self-awareness. Instead of letting go, the mind circles. You become mentally present, precisely because you are no longer emotionally available. This is a paradox many people miss. When you are present, responsive, and invested, you are predictable. Predictability is not exciting to the narcissistic structure. It is manageable. But when you withdraw your emotional energy and remain stable, you introduce uncertainty. And uncertainty is intoxicating to a mind that equates control with safety. As Carl Jung understood, the psyche fixates on what it cannot integrate. Your absence becomes a psychological puzzle she cannot solve. She may attempt to reappear indirectly through messages, social visibility, or carefully timed silence. These are not gestures of connection. They are tests to see whether the old access still exists. But if you remain grounded, something important happens. Obsession stays contained within her. It no longer pulls you back into the dynamic. You are no longer participating in the loop. Meanwhile, your inner world begins to settle. Unavailability creates space, not emptiness, but clarity. You stop reacting and start observing. You regain time, focus, and emotional bandwidth. And in doing so, you unknowingly intensify the contrast between your stability and her internal unrest. The fixation grows because you represent what she lacks. Inner regulation. Obsession is not a sign of power over you. It is a sign of power lost over herself. When you choose unavailability rooted in self-respect, you do not provoke chaos. You step out of it. And the moment you stop offering access to your inner world is the moment you reclaim it fully. There comes a moment when strength no longer needs expression, no explanation, no confrontation, no final declaration. This is the moment the game truly ends, not with drama, but with absence. A narcissistic woman is conditioned to expect engagement, whether through conflict, reconciliation, or emotional negotiation. What she is not prepared for is your quiet withdrawal from the psychological arena. Not because you were defeated, but because you no longer see the game as worthy of your energy. This ending is deeply unsettling to her because it offers no narrative closure. There is no final argument to rewrite, no emotional outburst to reinterpret, no reaction to analyze. You simply stop participating, and in that silence, obsession peaks, not because she wants you back in a healthy sense, but because she has lost the ability to define herself through opposition or control. The dynamic collapses without a witness. From a psychological perspective, this is the most destabilizing outcome. As Carl Jung understood, the ego depends on engagement to maintain its illusions. When engagement ends, the illusion begins to crack. Your quiet exit forces her to face an uncomfortable truth. She no longer has access to your inner world. And without that access, her strategies lose meaning. What is crucial here is that your exit is not performative. You are not trying to teach a lesson or provoke regret. You are choosing alignment over argument. You have learned that not every battle is meant to be won. Some are meant to be left behind. This is a sign of psychological maturity. You recognize that strength is not proven by endurance in chaos, but by the willingness to walk away from it. Inside you, something settles. The nervous system relaxes. The constant vigilance fades. You begin to feel the difference between intensity and peace. And once that distinction is felt, it cannot be unfelt. You no longer crave resolution from someone incapable of self-reflection. You no longer need validation from a dynamic that required your self-abandonment. This is the quiet power that ends everything without announcement. When you move on internally, the external bond dissolves on its own. No revenge, no closure speech, no final message required. And here is the reflection to carry forward. True strength is not in being remembered, but in remembering yourself. The moment you choose peace over proving your worth is the moment your life finally becomes your own.